Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this new episode of Sartorial Talks. Today, I'm going to try to address a question which is probably the most often asked question at Sartorial Talks, at Parisian Gentlemen, and maybe in the world of men's style in general. If you've ever been to a men's store or to a tailor shop, you probably have heard the tailor or the salesman talking to you about the quality of the wool. And for that, he will use these famous super numbers. I'm speaking about the Super 120, Super 140, and now even Super 180, Super 200. When you ask, for the first time you're interested in that, when you ask a salesman in a boutique, what's the difference between a Super 120 and a Super 160, for example? Most of the time, the only answer you'll receive is, it's all about the finesse. It's all about, a Super 160 will be lighter and more luxurious fabric, but nothing more. And in reality, the super number has nothing to do with the fact that a fabric is light or not, has very little to do with the fact that the fabric is a winter fabric or a summer fabric, and I'm going to explain you why. First of all, let's go to the bottom of the subject, because this subject, I've been myself researching when I started to be interested in menswear and in men's style. I've been making extensive researches to try to understand, but the definitions and the explanation I was finding everywhere on the web, none of them was the same. So I said, I have to dig myself, and this is the fruit of my research. So to understand what we mean by super, first of all, you have to understand that the word super describe the finesse or the thinness or even the diameter of a wool fiber. So what is a wool fiber? A wool fiber is exactly what the sheep is providing, what the animal is providing. Each fiber of the wool that is taken of an animal, in this case, a sheep. And so, when we say super means super thin or super fine. And where does it come from? In fact, if we want to really understand all about the subject of the super numbers, we have to go backward in history. And we have to go at the beginning of the 20th century in the United Kingdom, in a city called Bradford, who gave its name to a system called the Bradford system, who was a system where the wool expert was using to estimate or to evaluate the finesse of the wool, or the quality and the finesse of the wool, because you understand that the finesse of the wool is only one quality of a wool. A wool has to be not only fine, but also sturdy. It depends also the way the wool is woven. So the quality of a wool is not only described by this number. And this is why I make this clarification today, because I think it's not very fair that many people were sold the fact that if they buy a super whatever 200 suit, it will be much more beautiful than a super 120. It's absolutely not true, because we're talking about two different things. So going back to the Bradford system, back in the years, the farmers, the people who were breeding sheep and who were selling the wool, they would go to the wood specialist in Bradford. And the wood specialist they will carry with them what we call a top of wool. So as you can see on the screen, a top of wool is a batch of 1 pound of wool, which is ready to be spun. That is to say, it is washed, it is carded, it is combed, and it's ready to be spun. So, the word super, S-U-P-E-R, then you have a number, 100, 120, 140, and then you have a small s. And then let's focus on this small s, because this is bringing us back to the beginning of the 20th century in Bradford with the Bradford system. Back in the years, the farmers will come with a top of wool. What is a top of wool? What do we call a top of wool? A top of wool is exactly 1 pound in weight of wool, which is ready to be spun. That is to say, which is washed, which is combed, and really ready to be spun by a spinner. So now, the wool specialist will estimate how many skein. So what is a skein? A skein is a unit measure that was used back in the years and a skein, one skein equal 560 yards, more or less 500 meters, 510 meters. So, a wool specialist, just using two very complicated instruments, his eye and his hand, was able to evaluate, just by putting his hand in a top of wool, how many skeins of wool he will be able to produce with 1 pound of this wool. Or, to put it differently, how many times 560 yards he would be able to spin out of this 1 pound of fine wool. So you understand that it was a calculation that was extremely complicated, but these people were so experienced, they could, just by touching and looking, they could evaluate the finesse of the wool using this system. So you understand that when I say 560 yards, it's 560 yards of a single thread. So how many times you can do it? If you can do it 60 times, then your wool, 60 times 560 yards, then your wool will be a Super 60 wool. If you can do it 80 times, then all of a sudden your wool is becoming a Super 80 wool. Why? Because you are able to spin 80 times 560 yards out of one single pound of wool. That's the Bradford system. Just to give you an idea of the figures we are talking about now. Super 80, which is the first super, before the wool was classified with low, medium, fine, and superfine. The limit of the superfine is a Super 80. Super 80S, that is to say, you are able to spin 80 times 560 yards. That corresponds to 25 miles. That is to say, to give you an idea of how thin the quantity we are talking about, so thin, the wool is so thin when the fiber is spun, that you can make out of 1 pound of wool more than 25 miles of thread. So we've been witnessing, since I would say the 1990s, a kind of a arms race to push the limits of the finesse of the wool and use it as a marketing subject and a marketing argument to sell your wool at a higher price, and even for the people who are making suit to sell their suit at a higher price using these super numbers. So I said to you that Super 80, you were able to spin 25 miles of a single thread out of 1 pound of wool. A Super 100 can go as far as 31 miles. A Super 120, 38 miles. I'm looking at my paper. A Super 160, 50 miles. Just to translate that, the Super 160, which is for me the limit of luxury. I mean, above Super 160, you are going to something else. But already a Super 160, which is a fantastic fabric, you will be able to spin close to 50 miles of a single thread of wool. 50 miles, that is to say 80 kilometers. Can you imagine the finesse it represents? Now, of course, in 1968, the Department of Agriculture in the United States said, okay, this evaluating system is good, but we start to reach a level of finesse in the wool that requires more scientific way of measuring, that will go a little bit more into the detail than the hand, and I was about to say the nose, but it's almost the nose, the eye, and the hand. So they started to use microscopes and to change. And so the way now the super number were calculated, it was only a calculation of the maximum diameter of the wool fiber. For example, a Super 100 has a fiber which is not bigger than 18.75 microns. What is a micron? A micron is a million of meter. 1 millionth of meter is a micron. To give you a reference, a human hair, and God knows if I have a few on my head, a human hair is between 40 and 50 micron in diameter. So you understand that a Super 100, which is 18.75 microns, is 4 times thinner than a human hair, just to give you an idea of the finesse we are talking about. Super 140 is 16.75 micron. Super 160 is 15.75 micron. We are talking of extremely thin material. So if you are interested in anything sartorial, or of course in tailoring, you're quite comfortable with this. And I was among the first back in the years, 10 years ago, to question this question of the super numbers. Is it really different? Does it mean something for us, the people who love to wear a suit? When I started to be interested to go bespoke in 2007, I think the maximum finesse you can find in terms of fabric was Super 180, something. I'm wearing today a Super 180 from Loro Piana. And I remember my first suit at Chiffonoli that I decided to do was Super 110. And back in the years, Super 110 was already something very, very interesting. So the thing is that I think that the harm race for the finesse, that you know that we are close now to Super 300. That is to say, a Super 300 would be way under 10 microns. And I believe that when we reach finesse around 9 microns, 8 microns, so it's almost 8 times thinner than the human hair, I think we will reach what the nature is able to provide. Because a Saxon merino sheep, a natural Saxon merino sheep, not breeded, a pure race, is able to produce these days a fiber of wool of 14 microns. So of course the breeders have been trying to do some new breedings between this race and this breed to make some kind of a super champion of the super numbers. But I believe that the nature will give us the limit. And when we are going, I think the finest wool in the world these days, it may be by Loro Piana or by Zegna, this kind of big name are competing on this field. We are close to Super 300, and I believe this is the ultimate mark. And this will, in my opinion, will lead us to a new era in the world of fabrics. I think that the finesse harm race is over, and now we are moving more to more technical questions. Is my fabric able to be waterproof? Is my fabric able to be stretched? People need more technical garments more than ever. And so, for example, the research and discovery of the mills, of the fabric mills, were all focused on the super number back in the years, but now they are more focused on the technical properties of the wool, waterproof, etc., and stretch. For example, I know that the small mill Travaldo Tonia, close to Biella, in the same region in Italy, has a fantastic fabric called estrato. Estrato means stretched in Italian, and the estrato is a wool which is stretched naturally, without adding any elastan or any artificial ingredient inside. It's pure wool, but it's stretch, natural stretch. So these are the developments that we can see today. The fabrics are becoming more and more light, easy to wear, but also offer more and more properties. Like, for example, the Tech Merino from Zegna, which is a wool that you can throw into the washing machine. You throw your suit in the washing machine and then you put it on a proper hanger the day or 2 days after, and then you can go back to the office without being wrinkled. That's the new property of this kind of wool. Now, the second question we have to ask ourselves, and which is most likely the second most asked question we receive, is a Super 160 or 80 superior in terms of quality and finesse and feeling and comfort and shininess than a Super 100? Or to put it differently, the price I have to pay for a Super 180, that is to say, sometimes 2 or 3 times the price of a Super 100, is worth the difference of feeling, of comfort you have in your fabric? Well, my answer is yes, it is comfortable. I am wearing right now a Super 180 suit by Sant'Andrea Milano with a Loro Piana fabric. And I can testify that it is extremely comfortable and extremely light under even some. I wear it as a summer suit. It was one of my first summer suits, and I really appreciate. So yes, people who said to you, "Well, the super numbers is all marketing." No. A real, and when I say real, because now there's some mills, not in Italy but elsewhere, who are making the super number by themselves, more or less. But the people who are serious, who are really use this maximum diameter of fiber system to analyze their wool, they produce wool which is, if somebody say to you it's not comfortable, it's a lie. It is comfortable. The only thing that you can object to a super number, that it is more fragile. Yes, it is more fragile, far more fragile than a super 100 and super 120, or even some wools which are not even classified as a super number. For example, Vitale Barberis Canonico, which is, as you know, the oldest mill on earth, but one of the major players in the quality wool on earth, has recently opened the debate among the professional, among the media, by launching on purpose a line of fabric called 21 microns. If you are a little bit interested in menswear, every professional knows that 21 micron is not a super number, because the first super number starts around 19.75 microns. So 21 micron is on purpose a wool which is not part of the super number. And the aim of Vitale Barberis Canonico with this launch was to reaffirm that the quality of a wool is not solely linked to the finesse of the fiber, but is also, and more importantly, linked to the know-how of the mill and the way the wool is woven. So, answering if a super 200 is better than a super 100 is impossible, because it depends on what you are looking for, it depends where you live, it depends what you want to do with your suit. If it's a suit you're going to work with, has to be sturdy. If you're going to be sitting in your suit a lot, if you just wear your suit to some dinners and remove your jacket very quickly or not, it depends on many things. But let's say a few things. Yes, it requires more maintenance, because the fiber of the wool being more thin, it's more fragile. Yes, it has a tendency of shining a little bit at the beginning, have a kind of a gloss. But what is interesting for the people like me and many others who just caught the bug a little bit of the higher number, not that high in my case, but I like above 150, I prefer the wool, is that if you wear your suit over a long period of time, which is the case when you go bespoke, I hope for you that you can normally keep your suit your whole life, you will discover after, I would say, 1 year or 2 years, that the super numbers fabric start to have a patina, start to really give the best of themselves after a few years. Like in a shoe, like leather on a shoe, start to have more character, more personality. And only a super number will offer you this, but it's extremely subtle. So, 4 things to remember. First of all, number 1, the number doesn't describe the finesse of the wool, it describes the finesse of the fiber of the wool. That ultimately will have something to do with the finesse of the fabric. But it describes the diameter of the fiber of the wool. So when a salesman says to you, it's just because the fabric is lighter, no, it's not the fabric is lighter, it's the diameter of the wool fiber. That's the first thing to remember. Second, yes, a super number can produce beautiful fabric that can produce beautiful suit, but always remember that the first thing you have to look for in a suit before anything about the fabric is the cut, second is the cut, and the third is the cut, is the silhouette. Okay? So of course the fabric is important, but if you have to choose to invest in a better tailor or in a super higher number, I would go for a better tailor than a higher number. That's number 2. Number 3, yes, the super numbers have a shine that is becoming less and less obvious over the years, and they can have a kind of a patina that is superior to inferior numbers. And number 4, no, it's not always a better choice. It depends on what you are looking for in a suit. If you are looking for a suit to work every day, something very sturdy, don't go to higher number. I mean, Super 100, Super 120 is most of the time extremely comfortable and is already a super good wool. So I hope you understand now more the provenance, the origins and the meaning of the Super 120, Super 140 numbers for the fabric. And now I hope you feel equipped and armed the next time you will go to your tailor or to your tailoring shop to choose the fabric which is the best for you. Cheers.